Hey guys, Jamie here. We've got a 2008 BMW M3 with the S65. We're gonna do rod bearings. This car has 67,000 miles. We're gonna see the condition of the bearings. Because it's an 08, it's pre-LCI. So 08 and 09 are pre-LCI. The bearings are made from copper. After like late 09, they moved to LCI, which BMW started putting aluminum bearings in it. Curious to see what the condition of these bearings are. I'll also show you the upgraded bearings that we're using and also rod bolts. There's a couple other things that we do when we do this job. I'll show you guys a few of the tips and tricks. First thing we're gonna do is disconnect the battery. We're gonna hang the engine, we'll put the car up in the air and we'll get to work. So follow along, hopefully I'll learn you something. This is how mechanics do their workouts, because we're at the shop so much we don't have time to go to the gym. Obviously I don't do it very often. All right, so the reason we're using the engine support is we're holding the engine up. The subframe, we have to remove it to get the oil pan. The subframe is what holds the engine in. We're gonna be dropping the subframe out of the car. If we didn't do this, the engine would just come along with it. So this is gonna hold the engine up while we separate the subframe, and then we're gonna work from underneath the engine. So this is literally a life-saving tool.
I'm removing the oil filter to allow the oil from the oil filter housing to drain back into the oil pan. Then we're gonna drain the oil from the oil pan, and then when we're completely done, it'll get new oil and a new filter.
All right, we got the car in the air, so we're gonna pull this panel down, that panel, so we have access. And if you take a look, the oil pan is really pretty low, so I can stick my finger here, but it won't, like I can't get my finger in there. So it's definitely engine mounts, and anytime we do the rod bearings, we always do the engine mounts. Literally, it doesn't cost the customer any more labor because we are pulling them out anyways. So they buy the mounts, we just put them in for the customer. It's just a given to do it every time we do the rod bearing job. So it'll be interesting to show before and after. So afterwards, you'll see the difference in the height of what the motor mounts do. All right, young grasshopper, see if you can pull that plug out without getting oil on your fingers.
All right.
Go for it.
No shot.
Let's see it. No oil on your fingers.
Is there oil in it?
Oh,
like a pro.
Like a pro.
Nothing. Clean as a whistle. See what you got.
Old grasshopper. All right, let's see. I feel like I might have to eat my words.
You have an extension as well. How much oil does it hold?
8.5 liters, but by the time we pull the oil pan down, there's gonna be some extra oil in there. We're gonna empty all of it, so we'll probably end up putting about 9 liters back in it. All right, while we're waiting on the oil to drain, I'm gonna let you guys know, we have to lower the subframe, and there's a lot of things that we have to take off the subframe. For instance, the lower control arms at the subframe gets disconnected. We also disconnect the outer tie rod ends, but the subframe is gonna be completely removed from the car, and the reason we completely remove it is because there's a lot of work in there. You can technically lower it and work around it. I don't wanna do that for 2 reasons. One, it's a pain in the 2, for you guys, we want to show you as much as we can. The subframe is just going to be in the way, so we want to make sure we get it all out of the way. All right, we're getting pretty close. Dude, you got a lot of this knocked out, man. Good job, young grasshopper. So, by the way, Joey's an up-and-coming technician. He's doing a really good job. He's not done this job before, so that's why he's here helping me. And maybe a little emotional support, too. We're disconnecting the steering shaft to the power steering rack. So I had Joey turn the steering wheel, and this is the steering shaft right here, and we have to get this bolt out. The problem is it was facing the wrong direction, so I had him turn the steering wheel slightly so this would face us directly. You guys are looking at it straight on, and we're going to put an extension and a socket on here, and it'll pull it straight out. It's just a lot easier that way. All right, before we pull the oil pan down, we got to pull the belt tensioner out. The belt tensioner is bolted to the oil pan. While I'm getting this loose, Joey's going to take out the engine mounts. Now, the driver's side engine mount is completely cracked. It is horrible. Now, it's always the driver's side that's the worst, because when the engine torques, it lifts up on the driver's side. It's constantly picking up, pushing it down, picking up, pulling it down. So the driver's side mount is always the worst one to go. The passenger side mount, it's squished, but it's not ripped like the driver's side. When we get them out, we'll do a side-by-side comparison. So you can see the differences. Here's the old one, and you see how much shorter it is here compared to the new one. So you can see it's completely collapsed. In addition to being completely collapsed, This right here is cracked. I mean, if I can move it with my hand, imagine what an engine can do. So that cracking all the way around, the new one obviously doesn't have that. So even though the passenger side wasn't as bad as the driver's side, it's still cracked. You can see it around here. And again, it's also shorter. You can see how much shorter it is from the new one. The oil pan has 6 hidden bolts through these holes here. It's a really long hole and it reaches to the top for the T30 Torx, and I actually need a really long skinny Torx. You can't get a socket in there just because of how skinny it is. So it goes all the way up in there, kind of feel, crack it loose. And there's 6 of these little guys. All right, we got the oil pan out, so now all I got to do is remove the oil pickup tubes, and that'll give us access to get all the rod bearings out. All right, so this will pop out. Come on, rain. I'm making it rain, Joey. Oh. All right, so I released the bolts and you can see the crack through here. So these rods are actually cast made, which means there's not 2 machine surfaces that puts them together. It's all one piece, and they crack them off. And then when they go back together, they mate perfectly together. So the line literally just disappears when you tighten it down. It's pretty neat. All right, so Joe, you're gonna take these, and each of these bearings, we're gonna label them on the piece of paper over there. We'll set them all out so we know exactly where they came from. This is the bottom of cylinder number 7, and you can see some wearing, and there's actually some grooves there. Usually I can't really feel it with my fingernail. Obviously I got gloves on, but you'd still be able to feel it. It looks a little worse than it is. But what you're gonna do when you separate these, you're gonna use your thumbs and you're gonna push the center out like that. Wipe them off, wipe the oil off of it, and put them in place. So this is the bottom of cylinder 7. And here you can see the cracking like I was talking about. You can see it's not a smooth surface, it's a rough surface because the rod is literally cracked. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is to get the upper bearing out. I'm gonna take my thumbs, I'm gonna press up on the rod, and it's gonna push the piston up just enough, and I'm gonna swing it out of the way, and I'm going to take it out the same way I took out the bottom one. All right, Joey, this is top of number 7. So when we do this, you got to rotate the engine, and we want each of the rod bolts to be facing us. So we got to do one cylinder at a time. The next one will rotate the engine. The next one to come down, we'll do the next set, and then the next set, and then the next set. So we don't do all of them at the same time. Right now, we're just doing 7 and 8. All right, we got cylinders 7 and 8 rod bearings out. The bearings look like they're, kind of what I expected. They're definitely worn, but they're, they needed to be changed, but they're nothing too catastrophic. The bearings that I'm replacing them with, not the factory bearings. I'm actually using ACL bearings. These bearings offer a little bit more tolerance in the clearance because the factory bearings have a tighter clearance on the crank, and some people say that's why they wear out so early. These are not only treated, a little bit bigger clearance, allows for better oil flow. When we put the new bearings in, we have to lubricate the bearings. You can't put it in dry because the crankshaft, you don't want it to, spin on this thing dry. So what we do is we lubricate them like this. We use engine assembly lube. I'm using Permatech Ultra Slick. And so you put it in there, you want to make sure it's really lubed up well because this is basically the oil when you first start the engine. You want to make sure that the crank isn't rubbing on a dry bearing. When we use the rod bolts, so I'm using ARP rod bolts. These are strengthened bolts. They're forged bolts. They're not the torque to yield bolts like the factory. So here's a factory bolt. Torque to yield, what that means is every time you torque it, it actually stretches a little bit. So on these bolts, you'll torque it to 6 Newton meters, 20 Newton meters, and then 130 degrees. And if that's not enough, you have to loosen it and do it 2 more times. So each bolt has that sequence 3 times, which can be very daunting, very time consuming. And the reason they do that really is just to help absorb vibrations in the engine. However, we've got better bearings, so we're going to use these forged bolts here from ARP. One thing that's extremely important with these bolts is when you torque them down, you torque them to 60 foot-pounds, and then afterwards you have to measure the length of the bolt with a stretch gauge. And so what you want to do is you want to be within 6 to 8 thousandths. But you're going to lubricate the threads. Lube is good, and you can't have too much lube. Not only the threads, but you also want to lubricate the seat of the head, and the reason is you don't want to be fighting friction. When you go to torque it down, you don't want to have a false torque reading, friction of the threads and of the head of the bolt, you know, rubbing or pressing against the bottom of the rod cap. So with the bolt lubricated, less friction, you get a more accurate torque reading. So we'll use a stretch gauge and make sure it's within 6 to 8 thousandths. Hey Joey, have you ever seen Top Gun?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know they have Maverick, Goose, Iceman. Okay, I need you to be Lube Man. You're gonna lube the bearings, and I'm gonna put them in.
Okay.
All right. All right, so Joey's doing a good job of lubing these up for me. I'm gonna put these in. So these end caps actually have a different number, or they have the same number. So I'm matching up the number with, like we showed you guys earlier. So this is a 475. I find the 475. They have to be on the same side, and we'll thread them in. We'll snug them up, and this is the part where you'll see that crack like I was talking about, and you'll see it just disappear as it snugs up. All right, it is time to torque the rod bolts. I'm going to use this digital torque wrench from Snap-on. I've got it set to 60 foot-pounds. What's really cool about this is I can set it to foot-pounds, I can set it to newton-meters, inch-pounds. It can also do angle. I'm not going to be doing angle in this particular case. It's really kind of nice torque wrench. I'm also going to, you'll see as I torque it, this will light up orange or kind of yellow, and then when it beeps and lights up green, I know I've reached torque spec. It'll also tell you if you go too far. It'll light red, and we don't want to see red. If it's red, it means I've over torqued it. All right, as I rotate the engine, the next set of rod caps that are going to be shown, because this will be bottom dead center, will be cylinders 5 and 6. I have to access these 2 bolts and these 2 bolts. You want the 2 rod end caps to be right in the center of the engine, so you can access both of them. True. Dude, I worked at Lexus for a little while, and there was no repair ever. There was all maintenance. So get it snug on one side, torque her down. All right, remember earlier we talked about how the difference in the engine mounts will make the engine much higher? So check this out right now. I'm gonna use my official gauge, my index finger, and I can actually get my finger all the way in there. Before, there was no way I was getting my finger in here. So it's up, I don't know, I would say 5 to 7 millimeters higher. So definitely a big difference in the engine mount. So the engine will sit the right way, the way it needs to sit. It'll be a much smoother ride. All done.